Hey, Pin. Good to hear from you.
Good to be here.
How many years have we known each other all the way since Bain intern days?
Yeah, it's
I
probably
know.
2011. It's been like
Oof.
close to 15 years.
Wow,
Long time.
crazy. And now we're both in the
Yeah.
technology and the VC space and investing and running around. Kind of
Yeah,
crazy, huh?
which didn't exist back then. No?
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned 2011. People were like, have you heard of
Yeah.
venture capital? Everybody be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Crazy. So I'm really excited to have you on the show because I think you have an incredible point of view and you've always been a very direct, straight shooter in life. So excited to have you on the show. Pin, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here and thanks for having me, Jeremy. So maybe a quick one on my end. My name is Pinn. I'm a partner at Lightspeed Ventures. We are a multi-stage venture investment firm, primarily investing in this region in the consumer and fintech spaces. We are a global firm, but I lead out our efforts here in Southeast Asia, and geographically, we're very focused in Singapore, Indonesia, and the 6-7 Southeast Asian markets.
Yeah. And, I got to ask, going all the way to the beginning, like, why did you decide to be a Bain consultant? Because we were in the same internship class. We both got returning offers. We were both finding way to Bain. But why did you decide to be a Bain consultant in those early days?
Yeah. I wish I had a more inspiring story, but, you went to business school and it was, I guess, helmed as this CEO toolkit, a good place to start your business career. It did feel like, a good generalist track to start off kind of your journey, your career. Which back then I always thought that I would become a CEO of a company one day.
What was the experience at Bain like?
I have a very high NPS of the company, so shout out to Bain. I think as they have promised, I think it was a really, really good exposure to the different business toolkits, from communication skills to analytical skill sets. I think you really built a very good foundation to all of that, starting your career at Bain. But very close to my heart, and I'm sure your heart, you built a lot of good friendship just coming out of your university education. I think just having the mentors, the peer sets that were there in the trenches, working the long hours, helping one another out. It sets a very strong network, foundational network for you to rely on and build on your path forward.
And you spent time in both kind of Singapore and the San Francisco side. Were there any kind of like differences that you saw back then?
Yeah. A ton. It's interesting you still remember that. But just for the audience context, I started my Bain career actually in the San Francisco office before coming back to Singapore. And part of it was also during the wave where Asia was really the hype. Many people wanted to head out east and see what we've got going here. I think a few big differences. If I recall, one is in the US, you obviously have a much larger customer scale. So the clients that you're working with were very large corporations. You tend to have many consulting teams deployed in one client office. That in contrast, I think consulting was and is still a less mature business, and so you see much smaller team working for smaller scale clients. So I think that was one big difference. The other one is still cultural, right? I think in the US people are a lot more collegial, more open. I think in Southeast Asia, I think people are newer to just less familiar with consulting as a whole, but also generally it's a bit more hierarchical and less open, sharing information and talking openly.
And, both of us left Bain eventually, and you went off to Grab, which is now obviously a unicorn and so forth. So you went all the way back in 2015, which is, if I remember, a lot of folks went to Grab at that time. But I'm just kind of curious, what was your decision around that time? Why did you choose to leave Bain, and why did you decide to choose and join Grab, which are two different decisions?
That's actually, you put it very well. I think there are two different decisions. I think the decision to leave Bain, as much as I loved it, it was a little bit driven by the fact that I didn't know anything else. I knew I liked the people. I quite liked the job, but there were other itches that I needed to scratch as it relates to getting more operational experience, seeing other forms of businesses, other types of businesses, a different life cycle of the business. I think it also correlated, I'd say, with the time where a lot of our peers, if you recall, were leaving, at least in the US, they were all leaving these consulting companies to join the likes of Dropbox, Tesla, whatever you Lyft, right, Uber, you name it. So that was kind of the curiosity that I had for just something different very early in my career. Why did I decided to join Grab? It was driven by a few principles. One was that I wanted to be part of the tech ecosystem. I was already doing a little bit of that, helping clients do due diligences into the early cohorts of tech companies like Property Guru, like Lazada. So I was really curious and wanted to lean in to and get myself more exposure to the tech sector. So that's one. And the other one was the advice that I've gotten from a lot of people back then was actually to stay close to where the headquarters is, so you can see the decision making being done, right? So that left me with very few options. Actually, if we recall, there was Grab and then there's Shopee, right? Big, that left me a very small subset of options. There's Grab, there's Shopee, there's Lazada, I just thought the regional, let's say, ambition of Grab really appealed to me. And I think ride hailing at that time was also kind of just the newer wave of technology as compared to like e-commerce, which was, kind of a little bit of been there, done that.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how fast 10 years has gone by, because back then ride hailing was very new. A lot of people were scaling in new markets. What were some things that you learned from that experience while you were at Grab?
Wow, that's gonna be this could be a long podcast altogether, or just really I would say that's like really the early days of Grab. Today, when we talk about startups, people understand unit economics, people understand cohort analysis. None of that like existed back in the day. So to think about just that was crazy, right? Like, so the context, maybe then to summarize some of my own learning. One, being an early stage startup really imbue in you just the idea that it's possible, right? There was nothing, and then you, with a bunch of money, with a bunch of hustly young people, you get something off the ground. So that's one learning. The second learning was, just really, this is the digital economy, just had a lot more metrics that you can, measure and evaluate your decision making against. So I think that was one of the core learning, I'd say, from an operational perspective. You really become much faster, student of the business when you understand, or when you have a business that was scaling very quickly. I think the last but not least was, in the early sign, and this will probably lead into kind of my decision in the career path that I chose, was early signs of just the local operational advantages that you have as a tech company, being in the region, right? Grab, back in the day was fighting and up against very large and well-funded companies. Like Uber was here, the Rocket Internet, back Easy Taxi was here, and just a few. You saw that kind of the operating chops that we had as a local team really made the difference.
And you made a decision to eventually go into I would say back, but obviously you're an operator, you're a consultant, and then you managed to move to the investor role, which is a different capability as an associate at Tiger Global. So could you share about that?
Yeah, interesting. I think it was a result of a self-discovery journey that I had to go through. You coming out of business school, I think the mantra or definition of success you adopted was just that, to be someone great, someone big, you need to either be a CEO or you need to found or you need to start one of these company that eventually become a unicorn. And then for the longest time, that was kind of the North Star of, decision making, right? Like, hey, let's go to Bain, they'll teach you how to be a CEO, and then let's go to a startup and learn on other people's money, because one day you'll be a founder. And then, after 4 or 5 years of doing that, you just come to a realization that, hey, like this might be some other people's definition of success. I could do it, but was I personally extremely energized by it? Do I see myself running a big company one day? And the honest answer to myself, disappointingly at that time, was actually no, right? So, and then it got me thinking. Then what are the aspects? So the question I had for myself was like, what are the aspects that really energize me about Bain and about Grab? And I think that led me to the crossroad of, something that is more strategic, more operational, more strategic, it led me to the crossroad of something that's more strategic and more high level than Grab, but also more operational or more, kind of skin in the game than consulting, right? And I think the intersection of both, you have what you call, venture capital, right? Like you are learning about many industries at the same time. You're putting allocate your capital behind these teams, and kind of with the purpose, which I thought was a very meaningful purpose, of helping some of these founders fulfill their ambition and vision of a better world. Yeah. So that's how I landed up at Tiger Global.
And, it's interesting because Tiger Global 2016 to 2019 was actually a bit early, because, they were huge in 2020 to 2022. So it was interesting because you were definitely ahead, but Tiger Global was a huge name in venture capital, the approach, the strategy, investments. So I'm just kind of curious about what you learned from those 3 years.
Yeah. I tried to get a job with a lot of Southeast Asia venture firms, and I couldn't. So landing in Tiger Global was a little bit of a serendipitous, positive experience. If you recall, back then, Tiger Global was one of the, pioneer of investors in the emerging market. So they had a large portfolio, particularly at the time in India. And, being located in Singapore, our team was, kind of was tasked to manage, I'll say, the company there, and, was a large part focused on the reinvestment efforts into our India strategy. Key learnings. One, Tiger was one of the few hedge funds that started investing in, kind of growth and venture equity side of things. And with that, they brought with them just the ability to really surgically and analytically analyze all companies with numbers. right? So I think they were by far the best at that. So that's one. Number two, I think they also had a really strong emphasis on investing behind very big trend lines. And if you look at their investments in the early days, they made bets in e-commerce in India, which is at that time just completely berserk. Everyone's like, there's no way Indians will be able to, will transact on e-commerce. They had a very strong view that e-commerce is going to happen. It's a matter of when, not if. And being there early, we will catch somebody. So they have somewhat of a portfolio approach to that. But I thought the conviction behind those trend lines was very unique. Yeah, and then I think the last one would be they're very notorious or sometimes famous for being the investor that does not helicopter manage their portfolio too much. Some people like it, some people don't, but I do think that they were very clear on who they want to be, right? At least if when they don't know the operations, they believe that the founders know better than them. So they have, by and large, stayed clear and stayed away from day-to-day, helicopter managing their portfolio. I don't think it's everyone. I don't think it's who I am today, but at least what I learned from there is like just be clear of who you are and just be the best at who you are, who you want to be. Yeah.
And what's interesting is that, from there, I think you really can't double down on investing in venture capital as a career because you were a principal at Insignia, then you became a partner at Lightspeed. So I think earlier stage, much more focused on venture capital. Yeah. And I will also argue probably more hands-on, I would say, than Tiger. So I'm just kind of curious about that shift because now I'm like, I see you doubling down on venture capital as an asset, but I also see you kind of like maneuver those I don't know, levers, right? So I'm just curious. Yeah.
Dang, you did your research. That's a very acute observation, I'd say, right? There were two moves in going and leaving Tiger. One was actually coming closer to Southeast Asia, and then two was, like you said, moving earlier stage. I think the first move was quite clear in hindsight. I think venture investing is more of an art and a science. And part of that art is really to understand the founder's archetype very well and to understand the consumer profile very well, right? You can say you can say all you want, but I stand on the shoulders of a giant, going to India as a Southeast Asia female. And I think that just has its disadvantages if I really wanted to build a career in India. You need to be there and just feel and absorb kind of the cultural nuances and the consumer understanding was something that I wasn't ready to do, and in fact I felt I had more advantage doing that in Southeast Asia, which is kind of my home ground. So that's one. I think moving early stage, it was driven by what I said earlier. The question of what really energizes me. In Tiger, many people don't know this, but we were very fortunate, or at least I was very fortunate, that they had a spectrum of investment from super early stage, just coming out of the YC and they make an investment, all the way to really, really late stage, hundreds of millions of dollars deployed behind the likes of Flipkart, delivery. And, during my time there, I got exposed to all of them, and I find myself just really more energized working with early stage founders. I think late stage founders are cool and really smart, but a lot of times I find myself like, hey, the support that I'm able to give them, it's very big picture, very outside in competitor analysis. But in the earlier stages, working with early stage founders, I think I could get a lot more detail, a lot more operational. My understanding and best practices that I see from around the world was a lot more applicable to that stage of founders.
Mm. And you spent 5 years at Lightspeed, and I think recently you came out with the first report, I think on Southeast Asia, I think with a very clear point of view. And I thought a lot of folks were feeling like, wow, this is controversial. So Pinn, maybe why don't you tell me, what do you think is the key points of the Lightspeed report and why it's controversial?
Yeah. So summarize it into three things. One is we were the first to state that the conventional wisdom that compares Southeast Asia to India and China was very misguided, right? So that was one. We are a global firm, and we see that probably a lot more clearly than others, that it is big, but not as big. But more importantly, it's also a vastly different region, compared to what is generally quite a homogenous countries when we talk about India, China. So that was one. I think we were also quite open about or about our view that as we built for this region, which is still young and immature, and has an economic profile that is quite different from the developed market. Founders really need to be realistic about who can pay and where they are and how to best serve the rest, right? And as a sub bullet point of that, we also believe that founders in this region, no matter where they start, have to think and build something for the region from day one, right? They don't need to be there physically in all the countries from day one, but they need to believe that they are whatever they're building on needs to have possible regional impact. So, and then I think the last, which is probably the most controversial view that we put out there, was Singapore is really underestimated as a potential country to build for in Southeast Asia.
And what's the context for that last statement?
I think the context of that last statement is, for a long time, the Southeast Asia community has always been like, hey, let's go Indonesia. As long as you win Indonesia, we're good. So that's one. But, ultimately, I think a lot of people also generally have been working on the conventional wisdom that you build for a big country, right? Like, don't build for a small population. But if you look at the data, actually, Singapore is small, but extremely rich. And, it's in the context of Southeast Asia, you see today, many reports or just financial statements pointing to the contribution of Singapore as, a share of different companies' revenue is not insignificant. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting because, you had the Gojek co-founder share publicly, as part of the co-authors for the report. And he shared that, one of his mistakes strategically was to underweight Singapore as a market to fight for versus, I think, the Indonesia market, which Gojek obviously is the market leader on. What's your perspective of that set of decisions?
Again, I think the validity in that comment is really that if you want to be a $10 billion company, just building that in Indonesia alone, the likelihood of that happening is very, very low. In a venture time frame, right? If you want to build it for 30 years, sure, right? I'm sure it can happen. So I think that's probably the nuance, right? Like, right, can there be $1 billion outcome in Indonesia? Sure. Like, I don't question that, right? But I think when you think about venture, or typically, even if you consider Gojek's own journey, they have always wanted to be like a decacorn, like $10 billion valuation, $40 billion valuation. And today, Jakarta's, population, GDP per capita, digital literacy and digital penetration just doesn't support that. Definitely doesn't support that in the last 5 years ago, right? Today, still questionable whether they support that.
Yeah. And, from that perspective, what do you see is the future for venture capital as a result of these findings? Obviously, you and I, we've talked about it, personally, through private advice or whatever it is. But what do you think that future for the VC/startup ecosystem for Southeast Asia is over the next, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Look, I think that it will, I think venture capital is here to stay. I think when you have the market, profile that you see of, Southeast Asia today, right? There will be big companies built, digital first that will change kind of the surface of how we live, work, and play. And venture capital is just a big pillar of enabling that. I think the implication of our report is a fewfold. One is that as a industry, we just need to be more rational about the market timing and the valuation we ascribe to some of these companies. It's market. It will go up to the right, but you can't force the curve, right? Like you can't take a lot of money and try to make people spend more, or suddenly you can't make people richer so they have higher discretionary income, right? So I think that's as an ecosystem, we just need to get more mature in how we think about the value of the company and how we invest behind certain initiatives, and knowing that you can't force the market to a certain degree. Two, I think we probably as a region should also really right size kind of the amount of capital that we allocate to this in order for venture to be a high performing asset class, right? Venture is a very long term game, but in the short term, if you can't produce DPI or return capital, it does have in the long term some impact on how much foreigners or folks, capital allocators, want to allocate to venture as an asset class. So I think just timing that and being rational about that will be important. It's an important learning for all of us.
So, what's interesting as well is that you've also become a parent, right? We've both become parents over this time period as well. So how do you juggle that, as a, working parent?
Well, first to say, I think it's hard, right? I don't want to take it away from, any parent, especially, moms. It is very hard. But I do feel like being in Singapore, I have a huge head start. There's a lot of support. We are very well connected to everywhere I need to be. We have infrastructure that is, generally very pro-parent. Maternity leave for 4 months, and then after 4 months, there are childcare centers that will take care of you and with very reasonable pricing. We have help at home. I'm also super lucky that I have a very supportive husband. Shout out to him. And also my mom who lives with us. So I often tell people if, I don't make it as a working mom, I find it hard to, see how others will make it. So that's to say I'm really fortunate to just have a very strong support system to enable me to do the job that I do.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, like, what have you noticed? Any changes in personality or your outlook on life after becoming a parent?
Interesting. One of the now that you mentioned it, I've written an article a long time ago when we first launched Lightspeed in the region, and I told everybody that, hey, I think being a founder is probably the hardest thing after being a parent. And at that point, when I say that, I didn't know what a parent experience was. And now I do. And I actually think that there are a lot of parallels, really. Like when people say, hey, my startup is my first baby or the third baby, I think that's very true. I think there is a lot of, right now, I probably have a lot more empathy for founders, really, right? Like just looking at kids, from the perspective of like, yeah, I have absolutely no control, everyone over this thing. and I want it to be extremely successful. And there are certain decisions I have to make, certain trade-offs, and then also a bunch of different stakeholders I have to manage. And I think that just gives me a lot more founder empathy, just from being a parent. Yeah.
And on that note, could you share a personal story about a time that you've been brave?
Wow. It's an interesting one. I would call it brave because I think when you say brave, it has like a connotation of you've risked your life or you've risked a lot of your personal fortune on an action. And I would say I'm definitely not up there in that definition of brave. But I would say a very pivotal moment in my own career was actually the move from Bain to Grab. I recall back then, many people were very skeptical about that move. A lot of Bain partners came and asked me why I was doing that. Maybe we were questioned that move in particular. And looking back, I consider that actually as one of the bigger risks that I took. Right, Bain was a very comfortable life as a female Thai, consultant. I think you sort of have some path like laid out for you and in a very comfortable way. And just jumping into what was back then quite a barren tech land, right? With no, huge funding or no IPOs precedents. I think that was in that time, I think looking back was, one can call it a non-obvious path that I took. Yeah. And it
you could have made it.
Which turned out to be quite rewarding. Yeah.
You could have made it to a partner at Bain.
I wouldn't go as far as making that conclusive statement, but I say the probability was high.
Yeah, it was high. I mean, that's why all the partners came to you, right? Yeah. When I left, no partner was very skeptical about my move. So I'm kind of curious, like, what would that life be? I mean, if you had stayed at Bain, if that multiverse and you had stayed at Bain, how do you think that would have turned out?
I would probably be, surrounded by extremely smart people. What I might have missed out on is, obviously what I have now is, a little bit of a entrepreneurial like element to what I do, right? I have to launch a new brand in the market and continue to serve our clients in a way that, it's still like not a given that I will win, which I think back if you recall, kind of Bain as MBB, you're the top 3 fund, you're top 3 firm, and you almost kind of had it in your back. It was yours to lose. But also any new joiner wouldn't call themselves the pioneer consultants, right? So there's this entrepreneurial element that I really enjoy, and I think it was just not going to be possible back at Bain. And then I think the other element that I probably would miss out on is just, just ability to make an impact to how to a life of 1 or 2 very spectacular, special people, right? Like you think of the founders, like these people are just like crazy, right? Like a lot of time they have so much to lose, so many better options, but yet they want to dedicate 10 years of their life to do something and then get it from like 0 to like 1,000, right? And I think that for me, I find a lot of meaning in, right? The success rate is very low. So you see a lot of failures all around you and you're part of, you have to own that. But I think the upside, which I, haven't seen today, but hopefully I will see at some point, is probably one that will be hard to replace, right? Or hard to, to find in the consulting world, where you're more used to getting folks from 100 to 110. Yeah.
And last quick question I have to ask is, if you had a time machine and you could travel back to when you were an intern in 2011, like me, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, wow. Okay. It's a bit of a cliche, but I really, really believe in it. I would say invest more in just getting to know people around you, right? Like there's work, right? And you always, as kind of high achieving people, you always want to get your, high performing evaluation. You always want to get, on the best cases. But I think younger people probably don't appreciate how much time you had back then to really just enjoy being and like enjoy getting to know people around you, right? Your peers, your clients, like, I think it's just one of those things that, today I look back and like, oh man, like I have so much more time. Like, why didn't I get to know this person better? Why didn't I get, exchange more thought with that person? So that's one, just invest in the relationship that you had the opportunity to and time to. The other one is actually, I'd say take more risks. Many people, the days are long, but the years are short, right? And in that moment, you'll be like, hey, when is my next promotion? Like, what's the next best career move? But if you think about it, like, there's never a better time to explore and be curious and take, risks and, take 5 months off to go build something with another friend, or like go take 3 months and live in the US just to expose yourself to like the tech ecosystem there. You just never get a better time, right? Like the calculus is always going to be higher and higher opportunity costs, right? As you mature and, have all these other responsibility and financial needs. And, you are also required to be, more and more specialized in what you do. So I would really urge young people to just take more risks, be more patient, and think of, kind of their career as a truly 40-year journey. And what is 6 months in that 40-year? What is 2 years outside your consulting career in that 40 years?
Amazing. On that note, I'd like to summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thanks so much for sharing up your time at Bain, all the way from a lowly intern like myself, all the way to high flyer, rising star, senior associate consultant, to making the very big jump to work in technology at Grab. So I thought it was just fascinating to hear a little bit about those earlier career decisions. Secondly, thanks for sharing about your experience thinking through the venture capital stack, all the way from growth stage at Tiger Global to earlier stage at Insignia and Lightspeed. So I thought it was just fascinating to hear not just the lessons you've learned along the way, but also kind of the directions and levers you pulled to go earlier stage, to be more focused on founders, but while bringing in the numbers and the global context. And that culminated in the report that Lightspeed has recently come up with the observations for how you see the venture capital ecosystem to continue to evolve in the future. And lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your inner thinking, about the frameworks you've used in thinking about each career move, why you left a company, why you decided to join a company and industry. What's it like to be a working mom? And, what's it like to be a parent, but also to be a successful partner in venture capital today. So on that note, thank you so much, Pinn, for sharing your experience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And, thank you for also doing the work that you're doing, bringing the community together and getting us all to kind of share and chip in on the best practices in our thinking process. I think the listeners are lucky to have you doing the work that you do.